Hey everyone, we're excited to welcome you to MacSER's Going Global event. Today we have two very special guests who will talk about their experiences working abroad. First, Dylan, who has a master's degree in engineering physics, will talk about his experience researching abroad at the University of Manchester. Then Amy, who's going to fourth year of chemical and biomedical engineering in the biomed program, will provide us with a brief overview of her research experience at the University of Freiburg. Without further ado, I will let our guests share all their tips and insight with us, and there will be a Q&A at the end of the session, but you can ask your questions anytime throughout the event using Slido, and the link is in the chat.
Okay, I guess I'll share my screen now. Hopefully that's visible to everyone.
Yeah.
Perfect, thanks. Hey everyone, I'm Dylan, and I'll give you a little bit of a idea of my experience in the University of Manchester in UK, and hopefully some tips, and hopefully you get something interesting out of this presentation. So here's a quick outline of what I'll be talking about, but I think the most important things are the tips at the end and the award breakdown near the middle, just so you can get something out of it. So let's get right into it. So right now I'm a master's student in engineering physics. I graduated my undergrad in engineering physics and management last May, a month ago. And I did several different research positions. So with Dr. Gatai in 2016, after my first year, research in Dr. Knight's lab from 2017 to 2019, doing research over the summers and also during the year. And 2018 was when I went to the University of Manchester. And just to give you an idea, also I did a co-op in L3 Harris Westcam, a 16-month co-op, 2019 to 2020. So how did the application go? So I applied for MyTax Global Link, which is the grant that basically allowed me to go over to the UK and granted me the opportunity of doing that. So first of all, I needed a home supervisor and a host supervisor. The home supervisor was Dr. Knight's here in McMaster University. So I was basically employed by him. And then as the host university, it was Dr. Crow in the University of Manchester. Dr. Crow and Dr. Knight's previously collaborated, so they knew each other, and I was able to go over and be supervised by Dr. Crow, but I was still employed by McMaster. So I applied at the end of January 2018. Dr. Nice was like, "Do you want to go to the UK?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. How do I sign up?" And the research proposal was something that had to be done by the supervisors mostly, but the application document was done by me. The student official's transcript was scanned by me, but I was lucky enough to have it on time because I was actually applying to NSERC USRA at the same time. So I didn't need to worry about the lead time of that. And I needed a student CV as well, so I made that really quick. Back then I didn't really have too much experience in stuff. So I honestly thought I wouldn't get it at first, but then I got it in March, and I had to do a pre-departure orientation, which is kind of a joke over a call. And I was asking about visas and what do I do with visa, and visitor visa was sufficient. So just going to the country and filling out those little forms they did give you in the airplane. You can stay up to 6 months, at least in the UK. So as long as you're not employed there or you're not making money there, I was just fine as a visitor. So in terms of the award breakdown, MyTax Global Link gives you $6,000, and you have to use it between 12 and 24 weeks abroad. So I was able to go for 12 weeks. I started off 1 month of research, so all of May, May 2018, in McMaster, fabricating some samples, and then in June to August, I was in the UK. It was up to my supervisor, or whoever your supervisor is, to pay out as they see fit. So they can put this money into basically the reimbursement or into your pay, right? So you're paid to be a research assistant, and then by that, or you can maybe be paid by this grant for that, and not be reimbursed for travel and accommodation. Luckily, this was put into travel and accommodation reimbursement, which was all the costs were covered, luckily. And I'll give you sort of a breakdown in what I spent the money in. So for travel, it was the airplane tickets from Toronto to London and back. And I'll explain why I went to London in a second. And then train tickets from London to Manchester, and then a bus to Manchester to London, and then accommodation. For the first 3 weeks, it was Manchester, an Airbnb, then an Airbnb again for another week because I couldn't get a full month stay in there, and a student housing for 2 months, which I highly recommend. But the student housing, because I couldn't, their years shifted a little bit back from us, so I couldn't start living in the student housing for the summer until I think it was July. So I had to stay in Airbnb beforehand. And I highly recommend staying in student housing because you'll be surrounded by people that are also doing research or also staying there for the summer, and they're all your age. So it was kind of like I was kind of alone, completely alone, and in the Airbnbs, you know, with just your host. But then when staying with others in those student housing, my social life really took an upgrade. And then an Airbnb in London when I went back, so for 3 days, which I recommend doing as well. So why did I go to Manchester is the first question. So I'm just quickly going to recap what my research was and what the field looks like. Just maybe I can pique your interest too. So I was fabricating and measuring germanium microbridges. So first of all, this whole field of silicon photonics basically allows for high bandwidth communication. So if you have servers, the internet basically is reliant on all these servers, and the interconnects between servers or between cities is all through fiber optic cables, and these optics need to be converted into electrical signals, and all of that is done through silicon photonic chips. Now, germanium is actually used as a photonic system photodetector, and what it does is convert the light into an electrical signal you can actually use. The germanium band gap, basically what allows it to detect, so what brings the electron up to the conduction layer, germanium can actually detect up to 1.6 microns of light. What this means is that you have a specific band, so a specific number of light frequencies or wavelengths that you can use to communicate with. Now, if germanium is strained, so if you apply stress to the germanium, it can actually detect up to 2 micron light. So you can make that bandwidth, so the speed of the internet, much faster if you have more frequencies, right? Strained germanium can also be used as a laser material, which is really interesting because you can use 3,5 materials such as indium gallium arsenide as a laser, but it's not compatible with silicon, but germanium is. So this is a very interesting field to look at. So germanium can actually be strained through a microbridge. You can see on the right side an image of the microbridge, and because it's just floating there, it has strain on it. and we can actually measure the strain via Raman spectroscopy. So the reason why I went to the University of Manchester is that they have state-of-the-art equipment there. So Raman spectrometers actually raster through a sample and let you grab all these different spectra that you can see on the top right, the spectra for each single point that they take. And then I also made a fitting algorithm that can actually fit all these little Lorentzian curves and tell me basically how much is this germanium strained. And on the bottom, there's one of the Raman spectrometers that they had. So now a little bit more of the less sciencey part, just my experiences and how you can make the most out of a trip like this. So my journey to Manchester, which I do not recommend, went like this. I drove to Pearson Airport in Toronto. I took a 7-hour flight to London Heathrow Airport. In Heathrow, I took, so the next morning, but it was still within the 24 hours, I took subway to one point and then another subway to another point, and that point was the train station, and waited in the train station for a long time because I had booked the train actually a few hours later, just in case there was any delays in the airplane. And then took the train to Manchester, walked like a kilometer with my luggage in Manchester, and then took a bus, and then got to the accommodation. So it was a super long 24 hours. I was completely dead after that. I do not recommend this, especially because there were airplanes directly to Manchester, but I didn't do it because I thought it's a bigger airport in Heathrow, so might as well. But I do not recommend this. There's a lot of waiting with luggage, and I kind of almost get lost in London's underground. And who can't really, who can fault me when you have like a map that looks like this? It's just a bunch of lines everywhere. So luckily Google Maps was there to assist me, but also tracking me. So it was actually great to be doing some traveling in the weekends. Obviously, you can't go over the week, so I wasn't able to go anywhere farther than just England. I wanted to go to Scotland, France, but that kind of wasn't, I didn't get the chance because of the actual work I had to do. So these red dots was places I've been in England. So over in the weekends, there'd be this service run by a club in the university that would let us go over and would take us to these places, drop us off for 5 hours, and then pick us up. So it was great. And there's also a lot of sheep in England. So if you go there, you'll definitely see some. Made lots of friends from all over the world. So as I said, and this is just the last 2 months of my stay there. So I actually ran, these people are from all over the world. So Asia, Europe, I'm from North America. So, and we all ended up being in this student housing where we're doing all research. And we're also trying to learn about the city and just walk around and travel, right? So everyone has the same interests, and everyone's just great to talk to. So lots of friends made. And luckily, I went in 2018. So that was the summer of 2018. That was the World Cup, and obviously England actually got pretty far in the World Cup. So that was a lot of fun to be in. I got to watch the final in a pub, like it should be. And I was kind of a fan of Manchester City, so I also got to visit the football museum, and they had Manchester City's cups and stuff. So that was a lot of fun. Manchester itself was really nice too. These are actually pictures I took. Like there's a lot of different aspects, and luckily 2018 was kind of a drought year, which wasn't good, but it was good for me because the city is apparently the most rainy city in all of UK. So it was kind of a perfect storm, 2018 summer. And then I went to London for the last 3 days because I've never really been there to travel. So the last 3 days, I got one of these bus tickets, these tour bus tickets, and the tour bus, not to stay in the tour bus, but it just takes you around the city, and you can hop on and off different tour buses of the same brand, same company, and they basically act as just a mode of transportation throughout the city because it's a huge city. So I highly recommend doing this. It was really cheap to get these tickets, and if you go there, go to museums because they're really good. The British Museum is shown here as one of my favorites. It's the British Museum, but they don't really have stuff about British history. It's stuff from other places, so that's kind of interesting. And funnily enough, I went when the Big Ben was under renovation, so that kind of sucked. The output or the opportunities I got out of this really can't be overstated. So we published a paper from this. We also continued the research throughout the year. So instead of, I was planning to TA that year, but luckily I got this opportunity and was able to work throughout the following year just in the research, which I was really interested in. And I think that this really helped me get my co-op because it's a really nice thing to have, not only the research, the experience that you get, but you also the grant itself, right? When you list the grant or scholarships that you had on your resume. And finally, of course, it helped me get into grad school, which not so much the application side, but the scholarships definitely helped with getting scholarships in grad school. So some tips I have to wrap this up. So work as hard as you can. So I was working as hard as I could, mostly because you want to do, first of all, you want to take advantage of basically being abroad and doing research, right? You want to do the best you can. And you're going to be networking, right? You're going to have a supervisor from abroad. If you're interested in getting a reference from them, or maybe doing research in that university or nearby, it definitely goes quite far to actually do things like this. Live in student housing if possible, as I said. Student housing, if you get the right housemates, or how they say they're flatmates, it really makes the whole experience a lot more enjoyable. Travel as much as you can because you're gonna miss out if you don't. Take a lot of pictures. I took a lot of pictures, and I was lucky to do so because when making these slides, I kind of went a little bit nostalgic because it was already 3 years ago, right? So I think taking pictures is the best way to remember. You can actually do a lot spending very little in some cities. So in UK, museums are free. So I really took advantage of that, and it was great. And if you're in a big city for a few days, you might want to take a tour bus service. As I said, account that wall plugs are different there. So if you don't have an adapter, be mindful of that because you'll need to buy one. And also apply for scholarships and grants, even though you don't think you'll win. I was applying after my third year, and I was thinking I'm not, like, I was looking at the website, and there was all these grad students that had applied. I'm like, wow, I'm gonna get destroyed by the grad students. But it ends up that maybe you can actually get these grants and scholarships. So if you're eligible and you want the grant, apply, because it doesn't bring you any harm. It's just a few hours of intense work, but definitely worth it if you win. So thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned something, and I think we're leaving questions to later. So I'll pass it on to Amy. Stop sharing here.
Great. I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see the full screen?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Perfect. So my name is Amy, and I'm going to be talking about my experience doing research at the University of Freiburg in Breisgau, Germany. Oh, I can't change slides. Oh, there. Okay. So first, just a little bit about me. So I'm in my 4th year-ish of iBiomed and chemical engineering. So I'm in the inaugural class. I did 3 years of school, and I'm currently in a year of co-op. And just like some of my interests that kind of led to me going to do research in Germany. I did a year of undergraduate research after my 1st year. After my 2nd year, I went to Germany to do research. After my 3rd year, I did an R&D co-op at Copenhagen Technologies, and then I'm currently a process engineering intern at Aptex. So in terms of my application process, I was able to secure 3 different grants to go. So first was the OBW award. This is a collaboration award between Ontario and Baden-Württemberg, which is the province in Germany. It's like the southwest province in Germany. So Ontario and Baden-Württemberg will send students back and forth, and they really like to support just international research exchanges. So the process here is you have to find a host professor who's willing to host you for the 3 months, and then you submit a research proposal through them and some applications. And then I had an interview with the McMaster Global Experiences Office. So the one thing about this, in finding a host professor, I was cold emailing every professor I could find that I had any sort of interest in the research, just because you never know who's going to respond. Of all of the professors, I only had 2 respond, and I went with the first one that responded. So definitely just getting your name out there as much as possible. And then, so that was the first award that I secured, and that secured my position to be able to go. Later along, I found out about MyTax Global Inc. So kind of similarly, except MyTax, you can kind of take wherever around the world. You have your host professor, but you also have your home professor. So I already had a host professor through OBW, and my home professor was just Dr. Felipe in the chemical engineering department, who supported me going abroad to do research and agreed to be the signature on the paperwork for me. So his role was more for accepting the money on behalf of me and then sending that along to me. So it wasn't really collaborative work between the 2 schools. It was more just for administrative purposes. But similarly, there's the research proposal and the application, and I had no interview for this. And MyTax I actually applied for while I was already in Germany. So this was a nice like supplement to just finances while I was there. And then McMaster also has a Global Experience Award. So this is $1,000, and you can apply through this just through Mosaic. So this doesn't have to be for like research. I know people who've applied for the Global Experience Award to go to like a conference in the US or like a conference somewhere else in the world. So even if you're not looking to go to work abroad, but if you're still going out of the country anyways, definitely I recommend going through that on Mosaic. And just a note about visas, in the EU, Canadian citizens get 90 days to travel without a visa. So I arranged my stay to be in the EU for only 90 days. And then I left and went to the UK after. So I didn't need a visa at all. So this is kind of my trip to Freiburg. So I had an 18-hour trip. I flew from Toronto to London, from London to Zurich, and then I took a train from Zurich to Freiburg. This is just because flying into Germany is really expensive. It was like $1,600 round trip, and a flight to London was like 500-600 round trip. London to Zurich was like 100 round trip. So it just made a lot more sense to do kind of this like zigzag. In retrospect, kind of similar to what Dylan said, going directly there would have been a lot easier, but you know, it's part of the experience. This is the first time I had traveled alone, so that was definitely an experience. In terms of housing, I rented an Airbnb for the entire time. This is just because the location of my lab didn't really have any student housing near it. So I was lucky to find a place that was 6 minutes away just by walking. The closest residence would probably be an hour walk away. And then in terms of transportation in the city, biking is a huge thing, just a lifestyle in Europe. So the city was extremely bike friendly. They also had an amazing tram system, which was also free for students after 7 p.m. So I ended up not even needing to buy a pass just because I lived so close to where I was working. And the only time I really used it was after 7 anyways. And then finally, just walking. Freiburg has a population of about 250,000 people. It's pretty small. You can probably walk from one side to the other side of the city in 2 hours. So very, very accessible. So the lab that I worked with was the Plant-Biotech lab at the University of Freiburg. My professor was Dr. Ralph Reski, and I worked with Dr. Sebastian Hohenstein for most of my work. So this lab focuses on a moss called Fiscomycella patens. So the unique thing about this moss is it has the same DNA sequence for the specific gene that they're studying as humans. So I can't say too much about it just because it is proprietary information, but basically they can do kind of like genetic research without needing to go to humans as a source of the gene. So in the photos on the right, these are bioreactors, and these are growing the moss. So there's the 2 at the top, the 3 at the bottom. And what I focused on was the N-terminal protein degradation pathway. So N-terminal degradation, like at that part of the protein is, they're trying to study how to synthetically make proteins die, and how altering the genes around it and modifying them can affect that pathway. So what I did was a lot of DNA modification, like RNA splicing, PCR gel electrophoresis, just with different sequences around the N-terminal to see how it affected the growth of that moss. So these experiments had a lot of applications with autoimmune diseases and research there, because we were trying to see what kind of causes this protein degradation pathway that happens naturally, and how we can hinder the degradation to prevent autoimmune conditions like Alzheimer's, or the lab also had like a pharmaceutical side of it. So using this technology for healthcare. So Freiburg in Breisgau, Germany, it is called the sunniest city in Germany just because it's at the southwest corner. It was very, very sunny. So the nice thing, well, something kind of funny about Germany is they like to insert a lot of man-made lakes. So the 2 photos on the left are just some lakes that they dug out for themselves. This photo here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I lived in this greenhouse right here. So it was a beautiful city, like the painted houses. This is the old town. This is the cathedral. So it was really just an amazing experience to just walk out your door and be surrounded by just such beautiful architecture and nature all the time. The other thing about the location of Freiburg it was right in the Black Forest. So if you know anything about the Black Forest, this was the inspiration for the Brothers Grimm. So like Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, all of those fairy tales came kind of out of this forest. So you can see like massive trees. It's just like this huge forest that kind of expanses all over Baden-Württemberg, and the entrance to it was literally like 5-10 minute walk from my house. So like this photo here we took at the top of a lookout tower. So they had a lot of like lookout towers throughout the forest that were back from the war, and they still have those out there just for tourist attractions and for hiking, and they're just so beautiful, the views that you can see off of them. So one other thing about doing the OBW award is that they pay for all of their students to go to a little retreat at Lake Constance, which is Lake Constance kind of borders Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So it's this huge natural water reserve. We got a tour of the university, and we did just a bunch of like outdoor activities. So like high rope scavenger hunts. We did some paddleboarding. Here's a photo of everyone. So OBW works with, I think, every university in Ontario except U of T. So it's a wide variety of students, lots of different fields, and it was really nice because they paid for our train tickets there, they paid for our housing, and they paid for all of our food. So this was a lot of fun. Kind of the initiative here is that Baden-Württemberg in Germany is they're trying to get more international students to come to their universities. So if there's one student in a course who doesn't speak German, they will teach the entire thing in English, just so they can have more outreach to students from Canada and the US. So it's also a lot cheaper to do a master's there. If anyone is interested, I think it's like €1,000 per year for an international student. I think the conversion is like 1 to 1.5, so that's like much cheaper. But yeah, the initiative here is they wanted to show all of the students that doing a master's degree or grad school in Germany is very accessible. So similarly, I did a lot of traveling while I was there. In Germany, there are a lot of Thursday and Tuesday holidays. So anytime there was one of those, everyone in the lab would take off the Friday or take off the Monday. So we'd have a lot of 4-day weekends. So here are just some of the places I went to. So I went to Copenhagen. My flight from Basel, which is near Freiburg, to Copenhagen was like $40 because flights in Europe are just so cheap. So here we have like Nijhaven and the Little Mermaid. I also went to Strasbourg and Colmar, which kind of border Germany and France. So here we have the Notre Dame in Strasbourg, and both of these cities are just full of canals. I also went to London, England at the end of my trip because I had to get out of the EU because my 90 days were up. And I went to Stuttgart. I was lucky enough to catch the Banksy photo while it was at the, I forget the name, it was at the National Art Gallery of Stuttgart. So it was just on loan for that period. So it was really cool to see this in person. So this is only some of the places, like, I don't know if you can see behind me, but I took a postcard from every place that I went to while I was there. I also went to Brussels, Paris, but like the train system in Europe is just so amazing. It's so easy to travel, and it is so cheap to travel too. So if you're going anywhere, I highly recommend, like, every weekend, every other weekend, get out and see as much as you can. So some of the biggest takeaways from going abroad, like, it's cheesy, but you really get to know yourself a lot better. Like I had never traveled alone before going, and I really learned how to kind of maintain myself. Like I didn't know anyone going to Freiburg, so like the going back to like making friends for the first time, knowing how to communicate with people who don't speak English. So like my German is like extremely limited to like das ist gut and like ein Bowl ice, like one scoop of ice cream. So it was really interesting to have to communicate with people like at the grocery store, at restaurants who didn't speak English. And surprisingly, like there's a huge culture shock with going to any country, especially like Germany, which has like drinking in public. Like they have a lot of beer. You can get beer at the grocery store for €1. I think something funny is I went to a party of someone who worked at the lab, and they played beer pong with real beer, and the hosts of the party like actually paid for it. So that was crazy to me, because here it's just so expensive, you can't do that. And some other things, like you don't tip at restaurants, you have to pay to use public bathrooms. So just these like little mindset changes was really interesting. And I did not realize how cheap flights were in the EU. Like if I were to do it again, I would definitely go a lot more places, and I would make a point to like get out as much as I could. Maybe go to like Austria, Switzerland. Like it's just, Germany's right in the middle, so there's so much to see. In terms of how this experience has helped me, it's definitely added a lot of weight to like being independent, being able to be like self-sustaining. It's definitely helped me a lot in job interviews. It makes you really memorable to be able to talk about experiences like this, especially when, like for me, it was just so enjoyable. You can really tell during an interview when like it's genuine, and then that really makes you memorable. I now have friends all over the world. I have like my friends in the lab that I worked with, I still keep in touch with. So anytime that I want to go back, I know I have somewhere to stay. So like in the photos, like this is Caitlin, she was one of the students who also did OBW. She went to Western. Like this is Sarah, she was one of my roommates. And in terms of like, I put ambition here because like I chose to do this because after high school, I was lucky enough to be able to go backpacking around Europe. And since then I was like, I need to go back. I want to like be there for longer. So I spent the entire first half of second year like figuring out how to get back to Europe for a summer. So like with all of these grants, it's really intimidating because it's like, oh, like to go abroad, you have to have the best grades. Like they're really hard to get, but really because everyone thinks that, no one applies. So like just apply. There's no harm. And it will like definitely do you more good than bad. And then this experience has also showed me that I am planning to do grad school abroad, hopefully, if COVID kind of settles and we can go by the time that I graduate. So going and doing research has really shown me kind of the path that I want to take after graduation. So thank you. I guess it'll be the Q&A now, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Amy. That was fantastic. Now I want to go. Let me just quickly pull up Slido questions. Oh, it says I cannot minimize Zoom while I'm recording. Nice. All right. I think the first question that I see over here, or like the most recent one, is actually directed to Amy specifically. So Amy, did you know how to speak German when you worked there? If not, did you feel like you were at a disadvantage because of the language barrier?
So I do not know how to speak German. I know a little bit now that I've been there, just because you hear it around you so much, you kind of pick up little bits of it. But going, I think I did like 2 or 3 weeks of Duolingo as like I should probably know a little bit before I go. didn't really help me at all because Germans speak so fast. But in terms of being at a disadvantage, I was really lucky to be in a lab that had a lot of international students. So there was a big, they conducted a lot of things in English, and especially because English is kind of the language of science. Anytime that we had meetings about projects, the lab made a point to do everything in English, because I wasn't the only person in that lab who didn't speak English. And I found that a lot of the people in the lab liked to talk to me because they wanted to practice their English as well. So I was happy to kind of help them with that. But I think in terms of being at a disadvantage, it's definitely intimidating to, come into a group and be like, okay, I need you all to speak English because I have no idea what you're saying in German. But that's just, it's part of going to a country you don't speak the language. And I didn't find it to be a huge kind of downer on the experience. If anything, I grew and learned a lot from that.
Thank you. Our next question is, if there was one thing you could go back and say to yourself before taking this big decision, what would it be? Maybe you could start off with Dylan this time.
All right, I'm just trying to understand the question. If there was one thing you could, I would say, yeah, travel a little bit more, definitely. Don't be afraid to take off a few days, especially because the research is important, but just traveling is definitely important too. One thing that was really stopping me from going to Scotland, for example, there was one trip that I could have made to Scotland one of the weekends, long weekends, and it was mostly accommodation, right? My tax is not going to pay for the accommodation for me traveling, right? I'm actually curious to know what you did, Amy, because everywhere I went to travel, it was for within the day, except London, which I actually paid for the Airbnb there. But otherwise, yeah, it can add up. Especially UK is so expensive. Getting paid in Canadian dollars and everything being in pounds it adds up.
Yeah, in terms of accommodation, the only places that I went for longer than a day were Copenhagen and Paris. And then at the end of the trip, my mom came up to see, and we went to Brussels, Cologne, and England, and then back. But I was lucky to have a little bit more money to play with. So I had a little bit of extra cash. It really helped traveling with people. So when I went to Copenhagen, I went with 2 other people. So it was a $40 flight. I think our hotel was $150 a night, which split among 3 people isn't as bad, but Copenhagen is just ridiculously expensive. Especially traveling with students and not having the oh yeah, let's go out and eat nicely. We were we're gonna go to the buffet at the hotel for breakfast, sneak out a sandwich, wait as long as possible before eating it so it doesn't taste so bad. For dinner, we went to the grocery store and got beer and chips, it was really just an experience with trying to travel on a budget. We didn't realize how expensive the Nordic countries were. It's crazy. I think I paid $15 for a croissant before I realized the conversion for things. But yeah, in terms of traveling, it really helped traveling with people, and not really caring where you stay. It's just somewhere you lock your bag. And then when I travel, I am that person who gets up at 6 in the morning, leaves and doesn't come back until 10 p.m. So it really, we didn't stay in the nicest places. How well with that. But I guess also answer the question in terms of what I would do differently. I think travel more would definitely be a huge thing. Yeah, because the thing about like going to a lab where they're not paying you really, it was kind of like a volunteer in that lab and just getting funding to be there. They were like, no, if you want to take a vacation, like you're only here for 3 months, like go for the 4 days, like go for the 5 days. So I was lucky to be able to do that as well as learn as much as I could in the lab, because I mean 3 months is a short time, but it's also a long time. I think I was definitely really happy with everything that I learned while I was there as well.
Perfect, thank you. It seems like tourism and traveling is just a common thing. Our next question is, how did you decide where you wanted to study abroad? I know, Amy, you touched on wanting to go back to Europe, but maybe Dylan, what influenced your decision to choose UK specifically?
Yeah, so I had never been to Europe before, so I didn't really know what to expect. I was born in South America, so I was kind of like South America in a way, but better. So I didn't really know where to go. It was my supervisor from here that said, "You want to go to the UK?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." So I didn't really get the choice, but I would definitely go to the UK 100% again, especially because English. I'm not sure how much of an obstacle it was for you, Amy, but at least I don't know if like just having a like an accent from here, hopefully, like kind of was a thing that would make people say, "Oh, you're not from here." So, but definitely England is a great place, and obviously anywhere in Europe. But I would definitely go to England again. No regrets.
Nice. I can touch on the question quickly. Sorry, it was how did I choose where I wanted to go?
Yeah.
So in terms of the OBW grant, there's like, I think there's 14 universities in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. So it was just which professor replied to me. But Freiburg, the University of Freiburg is very, very strong in biology. And I really wanted to get a lot of lab work and cell culture and just get those skills because, well, at the time I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I still am a little iffy on if that's really what I want to do, but I was really adamant on being like, I want to learn how to cell culture. I want to learn how to like manipulate DNA. So of all the professors that I had cold emailed, this one had done this program with another student from Canada before, so they were happy to take me, and it made the whole process a lot easier.
Perfect, thank you guys. Our next question is, how did you socially adapt, and did you find it hard meeting people?
I can start. In terms of socially adapting, I don't think I am socially adapted to going back there still, just because of the language barrier being a huge thing. I definitely would if I had the chance. I think because I am typically a pretty shy person, so I won't really go up to people, but I found that everyone was just so friendly. Like they would come up to me. I think one of the first days, some like random person came up to me and was like, "Oh, like, are you from here?" Like, well, obviously I don't book German, so he was like, "Oh, are you from here?" And he like asked me my whole life story. But just like knowing how friendly people are, like not being afraid to approach people and just realizing that everyone just wants to practice their English, so they're like happy to speak English to you. In terms of making friends, I think the lab that I was in had like 30-40 people, so I was always surrounded by people. It was just a really fun time. It was really easy to make friends because everyone spoke English in that lab. And because the city is so small and everyone being so close together, it's so easy to just like meet up with people all the time. And there was another student from Western, and we kind of clung to each other the whole time, being the only two people there from Canada. So in terms of making friends, I think that was like a great experience. And I'm really, really happy with all the people that I met while I was there.
Yeah, so for me, the first month was rough. So I was in these Airbnbs and I didn't know anyone, and it was really like the group itself. I was there kind of by myself because I didn't really know anyone. It was just me and the supervisor, and then I would like work with some people, but it was mostly solo work. So I didn't really make many friends from work. But then once I moved to this student housing, it was like I met a bunch of people. There's one guy from France, one guy from Singapore, one guy from Malaysia, a few people from like different places in UK, different universities, and just getting those perspectives and just living with them too was brought us super close. Every night we would just like play like GeoGuessr and stuff, and obviously we were like super good because we all came from different parts of the world. And they also got me into anime. I'll never forgive them. So it was great. I think definitely having something that kind of pushes you to be with people helps, because the first month I was definitely kind of solitary, and I was watching the World Cup games, and I remember, should I go to a pub? And then I saw like people get violent in pubs because they'd be watching like England games, and they just like get violent. So I'm like, oh, okay, no, I shouldn't go. And then I didn't really know where to meet people until that.
Definitely hard in a different setting.
Oh, just to speak on that quickly, like being kind of sad in the beginning, like going abroad is hard. Like it's not easy. I remember the first few weeks, I was like, I'm going home. Like I'm not staying here. Like I need to leave, because like, I don't know, I wasn't expecting it to hit so hard to be alone, just because like at McMaster student housing, like you always have people around you. Like if you feel lonely, like I'm gonna go talk to my roommate, like I'm gonna go for a walk with my friend. But in a different country where I'm like, no, like I don't know what to do, like who am I gonna do it with? And definitely take that into consideration. Like don't expect going abroad to be easy, or like you're gonna fall in love with the country, like make so many friends right away. It definitely takes time, and just like being resilient at the beginning makes it so worth it throughout the rest of it.
I'm glad you didn't come back and spent the entire time there. Our next question seems to be upvoted. Not sure if this was mentioned before, but are any global research positions paid, or is it all through grants and scholarship? Where does that money go towards? I think it's a few questions combined in one.
So I know some people that went abroad. I know two people that went to France, and this was one prof that came to visit the McMaster, and then hired those two people to go to France. And so I think they had to pay for their own accommodation, but I believe they were paid to work there. So it kind of was I guess it ended up being like a net zero game. But there's definitely a chance. But it's hard, right? You gotta kind of pique the interest of a visiting professor, which is like very hard to do. But also, if you were to just send emails out. It's really hard. So I'd say these grants definitely open up a whole bunch of doors, and they're definitely accessible. They help a lot, and also if you're open to spending a little bit of money, that also kind of opens a few doors as well.
Yeah, I know that my tax, like in addition to doing the like $6,000 and go, they also have, I don't know what it's called, but in Germany, they have professors submit positions and you can go onto their database and apply. So this is all over Germany. So there's already like a research proposal that you can go through and pick the location, what you want to do. You put in your application, you get to choose 3, I think you rank them, and then they'll give all the applications to whoever is supervising the professor. They'll do a bunch of interviews, and then in that way, there's already a professor who's like wanting you to come in open arms. Like, we put the position out, there's money for it. I think this one isn't $6,000, but it's like you get a stipend. So there's like the living stipend and then the accommodation stipend or something like that. I'm not too sure. I didn't do this one, but I did apply for this one as well. So also through my tax. But if you are a little scared of like cold emailing professors, or you want to know exactly what you're going to be doing when you're there, I recommend looking into this route too.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you. It is 6:28, so I'm going to be mindful of the time, just because I know there's a math midterm later on at 7, so our attendees have a midterm. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Amy, for sharing your experience and letting us know about all the tips and tricks. That is it. I tried to go through all the questions. I'm really sorry if I didn't say your question, but I assumed the rest was kind of answered throughout the presentation, so I briefly skipped them. And that is it. You guys are free to leave. I'll stop the recording.